Hello and welcome back to my channel. I've actually been thinking seriously about this idea of a book club, of a Paul and Bernard Socks book club. Although Socks is asleep and he's not going to take part, he says. Because I was thinking about the book clubs that you get, like these ones that are hosted by film stars or TV people or radio people, and it's just absurd. You think they haven't sat and read everything and chosen what their favourite forthcoming books are, because there are always new books coming out. They're always just massive adverts, like we know that, obviously. And they have presumably a team of sifters who look at the things that look likely that are coming out. And presumably there are deals, all kinds of deals done with publishers. So they have to have one from this publisher, one from that conglomerate, one from that monster publisher, and they have to have one of each. The dark blue book with the yellow writing, the slightly fluffier one, the dead girl book, the harrowing memoir by someone we've heard of. And behind all of it is this idea that, oh, it's someone off the telly, we're going to love this. Obviously we recognize this nitwit's face from the telly, so we're going to rush out and buy it. And it all sucks. It's all kind of X Factor, Simon Cowell thinking. The idea that the more famous or recognisable someone or something is, the better it's likely to be. And we know that deep down that isn't true. We know that's just hype and shite. So anyway, having ranted thus, I'm going to think about recommending a bunch of books from my shelves that I've read, that I love, that might be a bit harder to get hold of, but you can always find these things. There'll be things to look out for, a kind of book hunt, perhaps. And that's what my book club would be. Something where maybe it's not as easy as going online and buying a bunch of discounted books that have been stacked up tall by the publishers in bookshops and put on the front desks with stickers, with discounts, or in supermarkets for next to nothing, undercutting all the other books that you can possibly buy. There will be books that you can go out and look for, or find in secondhand shops, or maybe look up online. That's what I would do, I think. And I was thinking as well about what I would recommend for the summer. And the idea hit me in the middle of last night that I've got my reading diaries going back 30 years. And what I should look for are the books that I've loved in the summer over those years. And I haven't had a chance to look through yet because I've been busy proofreading my next novel that comes out in September. My next After One novel. I've got novels out in both July and September. So I've been proofreading Elsie Mason's next novel, the novel that I wrote as Elsie, that's number 5 in her series, The Forgotten Daughter. So I've been busy with proofreading that, and I haven't had a chance to look at the summer months in these books. But looking back, say summer 1990, it's a long time ago, there are possibilities, I think, of finding things that haven't been hyped beyond out of all interest. I don't know. I'm going to look through them and come up with some suggestions, like Bernice Rubin's Madame Suzatska, her novel about the boy who becomes a concert pianist with this funny old piano teacher. There was a movie, wasn't there, where it's Shirley MacLaine, and I think that was kind of pushed at the time, that book. So maybe that's not obscure enough for me. I don't know. Do I want to be too obscure? Bernice Rubins has kind of fallen out of people's ken. She died a few years ago, and you don't hear so much about her books. I don't know if they're in print. So maybe banging on about Bernice Rubins would be a good thing. I don't know if I have my copy of Madame Suzatska. I've got some of her books. There were some very peculiar books. There was one about a baby who was still in the womb who could play the violin, I think. And there was one about the Messiah being born again and it being a Gay fella during the Renaissance, I think. She had really good ideas and really peculiar novels. I'm looking at summer 1991, which I remember being a fantastic year for books. See, there's things there like I Look Divine, Christopher Coe, a very slim, stylish gay novel that I've talked about before. Or James P. Blaylock, who wrote strange steampunk novels like The Digging Leviathan, quite hard to read, quite dense. Oh yes, I'm going to definitely Jonathan Carroll. It would be fun to bring out some of his books for examination, because hopefully my thinking is if I reread some of these things that I loved and rediscover them, that's good for me, but also it means I'm banging on about them here in, to the small number of people who listen to this and watch me doing these things, and it will do some good. It will at least put these names and these books back out there in the world. I'm sick of hearing about the same old stuff that we always hear, the new things coming out, the TV presenters who suddenly decide they want to be novelists. Ho ho. I'm going to find some proper writers I've loved over the years and tell you about them. I think that's my best idea of the moment, the Paul and Bernard Socks Book Club. Let me know what you think, whether that's a good idea or not, or whether you would actually follow up some of my suggestions. I hope you would. The first thing I thought of is here somewhere. Hold on. I think this was one of the books that made me think of it, which I read a number of years ago. I'm not sure if it was in the summer or not. Whatever Happened to Simon D. by Richard Wiseman. It came out maybe 10 years ago. It's a non-fiction. Oh, more than 10 years ago. Almost 20 years ago, it turns out. That's how time goes. It's the story of a lost 60s star, a TV chat show host, who didn't go on to become a best-selling novelist, who disappeared into obscurity. And he was one of the trendiest kind of stars of swinging London, and disappeared from our screens. And this fella, Richard Wiseman, sets out in the early 2000s to find out why he disappeared and why he stopped being famous. And it's a brilliant tale. It's actually a very funny tale. It's a kind of Shaggy Dog story, and it gets very, very funny. He finds the fella and brings him back into the limelight and gets him his own TV show again, and realizes why the fella might be quite so difficult to work with. That's the bare bones of the story, and it's very, very funny. So that was something that leapt off the shelf, and I thought I could bang on about that and make it one of the cornerstones of my first selection of books for my book club, in my hypothetical book club. But I'm warming to the idea a lot. Let me know what you think anyway. This is going to be quite a quick video. I do want to talk about other books that I've been thinking about and reading. I'm almost at the end. It's over here. Almost at the end. Well, I'm not on mic, I've got to shout up. I'm almost at the end of this. Armistead Maupin's Mona of the Manor. Book 10 in the Tales of the City series. I've been eking out the last few chapters because I've been enjoying it. I think it's rather sketchily written, I must say. It's beautifully structured. I love the characters, but it hasn't got the impact of the early books, and that might just be about where I'm at in terms of enjoying this stuff. I've got all of his books here on my shelf, right in front of me all the time. They're all here because I love his work so much, and my favourite book in the world is Maybe the Moon, his 1993 novel. That came out during his hiatus in the Tales of the City series. He published book 6, Sure Review, in about 89 or 90. with Chatto and Windus. Look, it's signed. Although I'm not sure I got this signed in person, 1990. And that was the year that I started reading him, the year of my first boyfriend who introduced me to his books. And I read all 6 of the Tales of the City books then. And then there was this 18-year hiatus. Oddly enough, book 7, Michael Tolliver Lives, came out the very spring that I visited New York and was reunited briefly with that first boyfriend in New York. And we caught up on 18 years of life, and I was reading this return to that series. And there's been 2 since then, Mary Ann in autumn, and the days of Anna Madrigal. And again, they felt a bit like they weren't as grounded in the real world as the earlier books. It's an older man writing about a younger generation, which is slightly fairy tale-ish. It was worse, I think, when they made a TV show loosely based on these more recent books, and he kind of skipped out Generation X. The baby boomers of the original books seem to give birth to people in their 20s now, which is very odd. They just missed out a whole generation, my generation. The difficult people who were in their 20s in the 90s. It was almost like the people in the TV series were descended from, were the next generation on from the people in the 90s who were in the TV show back then. It's very complicated. I'm sounding like Stephen Moffat's Doctor Who. It's not as complicated as that. But it's a very odd thing. He wrote primarily about people in the 70s, growing into the difficult 80s and 90s for queer people. And his touch isn't as sure, I think, when he writes about young queer people now. Why should they be? I always remember the scene that Auden and Isherwood described when they went to meet E.M. Forster, and he gave them a copy of Maurice to read in manuscript, the book he'd never published in his lifetime, his gay novel. And Forster said to Isherwood, "But isn't it very dated? Isn't it too dated?" And Isherwood said very tactfully, "Why shouldn't it be?" Forster did belong to a different era. He wasn't writing for the 60s or 70s. So maybe mindful of that kind of thing, with this one, Armistead Maupin returns to 1993, to the point at which maybe the moon came out in the real world, the point at which I was 23 and still reading and rereading his books as I prepared my first books. And it feels like an authentic, although that word rankles slightly, capture, a return to the 90s. It's set in England mostly, and that doesn't help because it's a slightly rose-tinted view of the Cotswolds. I mean, maybe the Cotswolds and all that is very rose-tinted. I think it is quite fancy down there. I wish Mrs. Madrigal and Michael were visiting Manchester, or somewhere normal. I wish they were going to the north and encountering something a bit more abrasive and dramatic than this kind of fairy tale castle, this dilapidated castle in the south. Anyway, there's lots of pleasures in this book, of his usual kind, the kind of collision of characters from different backgrounds, and the meshing of our favourite characters into what he calls a logical family, not a biological family. The thesis that he works on all the time, that friends find each other and make the best kind of families, a queer family. So yes, I'm enjoying it, and a few chapters from the end, but it feels like a kind of a latter day episode, slotting into the world that we know. And there are those missing years, those 18 years in those books, so maybe he will do more. I'd like to see what they were all up to during the millennium. It's a bit like the Frasier series, where, we had however many years missing there, 20, 18, when we're led to believe Frasier had this TV career, and you long to see that show. So maybe in a novel, it's easier to recapture, to go back in time, isn't it? Because you're not dependent on actors being de-aged when you go back. So I'm going to finish this. I'm going to hopefully finish my proofreading this week and return to my ongoing novel. I feel as if I've been a bit harsh on the Maupin. I am enjoying it. I feel like it's been ironed smooth somehow. There's a very odd scene where our lead characters, our favourite characters from San Francisco, go to Mona's manor, and one minute they're on the train talking, and the next minute they're in a taxi with no transition. They're talking on a train, having sandwiches, then the driver turns to talk to them, and we haven't heard about them getting in the taxi. So in a way, I feel like it's been edited to kind of mercilessly to pull out everything extraneous and leave just the bare bones of dialogue and a few bits of description. I could do with a bit more kind of richness of description, perhaps. But maybe that's just my taste now. I used to love the early books where there was hardly anything but dialogue, and it felt like watching a movie. Maybe our tastes change. Well, I know they change. Of course they change. And maybe I just like something a bit wordier and dense, perhaps, these days. I don't know. I'm going to go and look at my own old reading journals and think about books that I might recommend for the summer. Although it's raining again, which is really annoying. We had 2 days of sun and we managed to be in the garden and have people around, lots of people around in the garden, drinking and having food on Sunday. And it felt like the proper beginning of summer. That's what's making me think about summer book clubs. And now it's raining again. Never mind. Anyway, I'm going to stop and I will say goodbye. And I'll see you again in the next episode. Goodbye.